She handed me a trash bag. Not a box, not a suitcase. A black 30-gallon trash bag. And she stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, arms crossed, wearing my father's old cardigan, and told me I had 48 hours to be gone. That was the moment I realized Sandra had been planning this since the day we buried him. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My name is Nicole. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Nothing fancy. A gravel driveway. A backyard that smelled like red clay after it rained. My dad, Robert, was a civil engineer who drove a 10-year-old Chevy Silverado even after he could have afforded something nicer. He believed that a person's house was their anchor. He said that to me more than once. He said it like it was scripture. My mom passed when I was 11. Ovarian cancer. And for about 4 years after that, it was just me and Dad. We figured it out together. I learned to cook spaghetti from a box. He learned to braid hair off a YouTube tutorial at midnight. It wasn't a perfect childhood, but it was ours. And then, when I was 15, he met Sandra Cho. She was a paralegal at a firm downtown, sharp-dressed, soft-spoken, and she had this way of looking at my father, like he was the only solid thing in a room full of noise. I told myself I liked her. I told myself that for 7 straight years. That's my flaw. Right there. I am very, very good at telling myself things. They got married when I was 17. I was the maid of honor. I smiled in every single photograph. And here's what I want you to understand. Sandra was never outright cruel. She didn't call me names. She didn't forbid me from coming home for holidays. She was just selective. Selective about what got repaired in the house. Selective about whose name was on the grocery list. Selective about which story she told my father about me when I wasn't in the room. Little things. The kind you can't prove. The kind that over time add up to a wall. I left for college at 18, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, so I wasn't far, and I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover what my scholarships didn't. Dad offered money. Sandra always had a reason it wasn't a good month. I never said anything. Because I didn't want to be the difficult daughter. I want to stop here for a second, because I've talked to a lot of women who've been in this exact position, where you know something's off, but you can't name it, so you stay quiet to keep the peace. If that's ever been you, drop a comment below. Because that silence is how it starts. Dad got sick my junior year of college. Stage 3 colorectal cancer. He was 61 years old, and he'd never smoked a day in his life. And suddenly he was losing 15 pounds in 2 months and couldn't keep a meal down. I drove home every weekend. I slept on the couch more times than I can count. I helped with the medications, the appointments, the insurance calls that lasted 45 minutes and solved absolutely nothing. Sandra was present. I'll give her that. But there was something in her eyes during those months that I couldn't place then. Something that looked, in retrospect, less like grief and more like calculation. I pushed that thought down so hard, I nearly forgot I had it. Dad had a good stretch in early spring, started eating again, started cracking bad jokes about his oncologist's parking situation. We had one dinner, me, him, and Sandra, where everything felt almost normal. He made his chili. Sandra brought a bottle of white wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and at the end of the night, my dad looked at me across the table and said, "Nicole, the house is yours. It was always going to be yours. I've already handled it." Sandra didn't look up from her wine glass. I didn't ask what he meant. I should have asked what he meant. He died on a Thursday morning in October, the kind of morning where the light is gold and the air smells like wood smoke and everything feels too still. I was there. I held his hand. Sandra was on the other side of the bed, and she didn't cry, not once, which I noticed and then felt guilty for noticing. Grief is strange. It makes you suspicious of everything, including yourself. The service was small. He'd wanted that. 30 or so people at a chapel off Chapman Highway, then a reception at the house, where neighbors brought casseroles and Pyrex dishes and left them on the counter like offerings. Sandra was gracious. Perfectly gracious. And that night, after everyone had gone home and I was washing the last of the dishes, She came and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, very quietly, "Nicole, we should talk about next steps. For the house." I told her I was too tired, that we'd figure it out later. Later. One of the most expensive words in the English language. Here's where things started shifting in ways I couldn't fully track. Over the next 2 weeks, Sandra's behavior changed in very small, very deliberate increments. She started referring to the house as her house. Not our house, not even the house. Her house. As in, I need to think about what I want to do with her house. I told myself it was grief speak. People say strange things when they're in pain. But then she changed the Wi-Fi password and didn't tell me. Then she rescheduled my dad's estate meeting with the attorney, the one I was supposed to attend, without mentioning it to me until after it had already happened. When I confronted her about it, she looked at me with this expression that was half pity, half something else. "You were dealing with so much," she said. "I didn't want to burden you." She said it so calmly, and for a full 20 seconds, I wondered if she was right. I really want to know. Have you ever been gaslit so smoothly that you started questioning your own timeline? Because that's exactly what was happening to me, and I didn't have a name for it yet. Tell me in the comments. It was my best friend, Diane, who I've known since the 7th grade, who once helped me move a futon up 3 flights of stairs at midnight. It was Diane who finally said it out loud. We were sitting in her kitchen in East Knoxville, splitting a rotisserie chicken at her table, and I was walking her through everything. The password, the meeting, the way Sandra had started CCing herself on emails from the insurance company. And Diane just looked at me, flat and direct, and said, "Nicole, she's trying to cut you out of your own inheritance." I wanted to argue. I started to argue. And then I thought about what my father had said at the dinner table. The house is yours. It was always going to be yours. I've already handled it. And I drove home that night in the dark, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes because something had just clicked into place. Something cold and clear. What had he already handled? So I went to find out. And what I found was so much bigger than a house. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it's not dramatic. It's not some movie montage where I storm into a lawyer's office with fire in my eyes. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table. I was renting a studio in North Knoxville at the time, 3rd floor. The fridge hummed so loud you could hear it from the bedroom, and I had my dad's old manila folder open in front of me, the one he kept in the filing cabinet in his home office. The one Sandra had told me, very politely, was probably just old paperwork when I'd asked about it at the house. She was wrong about that. Inside that folder was a document dated 14 months before my father died. It was a deed transfer. Notarized, signed by my father, witnessed by 2 people I didn't recognize, and recorded with the Knox County Register of Deeds. He had transferred the property, the house, the land it sat on, the detached garage into my name. Solely my name. Not a joint transfer. Not a trust. My name, Nicole Marie Hargrove, as sole owner. I read it 3 times. Then I sat there listening to the fridge hum. Then I read it a 4th time. Here's the thing about being handed proof. You don't feel triumphant. Not right away. What you feel, at least what I felt, is this slow, spreading cold, like ice water moving through your chest. Because the proof doesn't just confirm what Sandra did. It confirms what my father knew she might do. He knew. He transferred that house 14 months before he died, because he knew. And he never told me, because he was still trying to protect everyone, right up until the end. I keep coming back to that, even now. My dad loved Sandra, I genuinely believe that. But he also knew exactly who she was. And he chose to protect me, without making me carry the weight of knowing. If your parent ever did something quiet like that for you, something you only understood later, I'd really love to hear about it in the comments, because that kind of love is hard to talk about. I didn't tell Sandra I'd found it. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next 11 days doing what I can only describe as the least glamorous revenge in history. I called the Knox County Register of Deeds and confirmed the recording. I pulled the original filing number. I called an attorney, a real estate attorney named Carla, who I found through Diane's sister, who charged me $250 for a 1-hour consultation and was worth every single penny. Carla looked at the document, looked at me and said, "This is airtight. You own this property. Full stop." She said it the way you'd say the sky is blue. Like it wasn't even a question. Then she explained what that meant for Sandra. Sandra had no legal claim to the property. She could not sell it. She could not refinance it. She could not legally remain in it without my permission. The fact that she'd been paying utilities and had redirected some of the estate mail to herself, that was aggressive, Carla said. But it didn't override a recorded deed. Sandra had spent 2 months building a castle on someone else's land. On my land. The morning Sandra handed me that trash bag, she had no idea I'd already met with Carla twice. She had no idea I had the deed in a folder in my car. She had no idea I'd already filed the paperwork to formally assert ownership. She just thought she'd won. You could see it in how she stood. Shoulders back. One hand on the doorframe of my father's house, my house, like she was already redecorating in her head. She said, "I think it's time you found your own place, Nicole. This is a fresh start for both of us." A fresh start. I took the trash bag from her hand. I said, "Okay, I'll be in touch." And I walked to my car. I let 3 days pass. I know that sounds cruel, but I needed it to be real. I needed Sandra to feel settled, to start making plans, to maybe call a realtor, to imagine what her life looked like in that house without me in it. I needed her to commit. On the 4th day, Carla sent the formal notice. It was a notice to vacate. Mailed certified. Return receipt. Hand-delivered by a process server as a backup. Addressed to Sandra Cho. Identifying her as an unauthorized occupant of a property held solely in the name of Nicole Marie Hargrove, and giving her 30 days to vacate the premises. Carla told me Sandra's hands were shaking when she signed for it. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. Sandra called me 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. The 3rd time, I picked up. She wasn't soft-spoken anymore. She told me I was ungrateful, that she'd given years of her life to our family, that my father would be ashamed of me. She said that last part twice, slowly, like she wanted it to land somewhere deep. I waited until she was done, and then I said, "Sandra, I have the deed. I have the recording date. I have an attorney. And I have 30 days of patience left. Use them wisely." Then I hung up. The fridge wasn't humming anymore. The whole apartment was just quiet. Sandra vacated on day 26. She took things that weren't hers. Some of my father's tools from the garage. A cast iron skillet I'd been using since I was 12. A framed photo from the hallway that I still haven't replaced. Small thefts. Petty ones. The kind that tell you more about a person than anything large would. I changed the locks on a Wednesday morning in February. Stood in the kitchen for a long time after. The house smelled different without her. It smelled like the old house again. That particular mix of wood and dust and something faintly like the cedar closet in my dad's bedroom. I stood there in the kitchen and I just breathed it in. And I didn't cry. I thought I would. I had braced myself for it, but what I felt wasn't relief. It was more like the absence of pressure. Like something that had been pressing on my sternum for 2 years had finally lifted. Not joy. Just room to breathe. And I think that's what people don't talk about enough. That winning doesn't feel the way you think it will. Nobody tells you about the quiet after. If you've ever fought hard for something that was already yours, and you got it back, and it still felt complicated, you know exactly what I mean. Tell me in the comments. Because I've never felt more alone than I did, standing in that kitchen I just reclaimed. I'm living in the house now. I repainted the kitchen. Lighter color, a pale sage green that my dad probably would have called a little much. I replaced the locks, obviously. I found a box in the back of the hall closet that Sandra had missed, my dad's old drafting pencils, a birthday card I'd made him in 3rd grade, and a folded piece of paper in his handwriting that just said, "Nicole, you always knew what was right. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I don't know when he wrote that. I don't know if it was meant for me to find, or if it was just a note he wrote to himself, but I keep it on the kitchen windowsill, next to the ceramic pot where I'm trying to grow basil for the third time and failing. Some things you just keep trying. As for Sandra, she's renting a condo on the other side of Knoxville. We don't speak. She sent one email, 6 months after it was all over, that started with, "I hope we can both heal from this." End quote. I read it once. Then I archived it. There's nothing to heal from, Sandra. You just lost. Here's the part I sit with, though. Because I'm not proud of all of it. I'm not proud that I let things go as far as they did. I'm not proud that I spent years being the quiet, compliant daughter, who smiled through every photograph, who never pushed back, who kept telling herself that keeping the peace was the same as being good. It isn't. Keeping the peace is sometimes just postponing the war, and the price of postponement is always paid by someone. Stories like this one live in the ordinary, in the folded piece of paper at the back of the closet, in the deed nobody thought to look for, in the daughter who stayed quiet 1 year too long. If you've ever been the person in a family who made themselves small to keep everyone else comfortable, this channel is for you. Subscribe, because there are more stories where this came from, and every single one of them ends the same way, with someone finally deciding they're done being small. I'm Nicole, and this is my house.